Hello friends, welcome to this session. Today we'll see how we can secure access to our APIs using Amazon Cognito, and I will try to show this through API Gateway. So Amazon Cognito supports OAuth 2.0 authorization framework. It supports different types of grants like authorization code grant, implicit grant, and another one is client credential grant. Now we'll focus on this particular type in this session, where we want a service to communicate another service using client credentials grant, or you can say authorizing machine to machine requests. So to show client credentials grants how it works, we need to configure Cognito, and then I will create mock API using API Gateway, and in API Gateway I will use Cognito to authorize the request, which I will send it from Postman. So three services will be required: Cognito, API Gateway, and Postman. Let's get started with this then. So now we will log into AWS console and we'll go to Cognito service, create manage user pools, create a user pool, and we'll create a pool, name it review defaults. I will leave it as is, create pool. So the pool is created now, and this is a pool ID. You can keep a note of this. Now we'll go under app integration. We'll create a domain name, and you can just give some domain name, check the availability of that. It says yes, it is fine, so I will just create this. Postman will use this particular endpoint to reach out to Cognito to get the token. Now we'll create resource servers. Add a resource server, give some name for it, let's say test resource, and some identifier. Here I will just give some text, let's say test, and scopes. So let's say read is for get operations and write for post operations. So these are the two scopes we have defined. Save the changes, and now we'll create app clients. Add an app client, give it some name, let's say test client. I'm not changing any defaults for refresh token, access token expiration, ID token expiration. I will just leave all as is for now, and create app client. Now once you create app client, you will get an app client ID and app client secret. Now these two are important because Postman will use these client ID and client secrets when it sends a request to get authorized. When you create app client, you will see an app client settings also gets created for this client, and you need to configure allowed OAuth flows for this particular app client, and we are going to select client credentials. Also, if you see, the custom scopes which we created in our resource servers show up here. This was the identifier we gave, test, and these are the two scopes we created, read and write. So they both are here. So we'll select these scopes. Also we will select Cognito user pool and then save these changes. So now our Cognito user pool is configured. Now we'll go to API Gateway and we'll create a mock API. So we'll create a REST API, build a new API, and we can call it as say test API. So we'll create a resource, let's say test, and within that we'll create a method, say get method, and we'll make it as mock, and we'll create another method, post method, and this one also integration type, we'll keep it as mock. So both the operations are created. We'll go to get, and under integration response we'll add some JSON response, and now we can deploy this API. Let's call it v1. Now we'll go to authorizers here on the left menu, and we'll create a new authorizer. Name it something, let's say test Cognito auth, any name you can give, and then select in type as Cognito. Under user pools, select your region where you have actually created your user pool, and it should automatically show there, or a list of it, so then you can select the one which you want. I have just called service pool. And token source, which will be authorization, and create it. Once authorizer is created, resources, as you see right now we have not selected any authorization, so these operations or methods are accessible without any authorization. So we'll just deploy the API once more. So we'll copy this invoke URL. Now let's go to Postman. I have already created these two operations to test. So get operation, I will just replace the new invoke URL. I was testing it earlier. So this API, if I right now run, got me the message status 200k. So it is working because authorization is not required right now. So now we will secure our API endpoints using authorizer. So this is authorizer which we created. Go back to resources, get, inside method request, and authorizer. So it's not showing here right now. We just refresh the page. Authorization, and you can see the authorizer which created is showing up here. Select it, and auth scopes. Now if you recall, these are the scopes which we created for resource server. So I will mention it requires this scope to access this particular operation. The access token should have this scope authorized, otherwise it will not allow. Same way for post, method request, select the authorizer, and here we'll say test, right. So we have set up the authorization now, and now we'll go to Postman and try to send this request again without any access token. It's just taking time to refresh. Yes, I found the problem. After attaching authorizers, we did not deploy it, so we'll deploy the API again. So it's deployed. Now we go back to Postman and run it. Yes, so here it is, message unauthorized. It just took some time to apply the authorization, and the status is 401 unauthorized. So now we'll make changes to our request and add request to get access token. So under authorization, right now it was no auth, we still select OAuth 2.0, and here we'll configure the new token. So under grant type, select client credentials. Under access token URL, if you recall, this is the URL of domain name which we created, ccfg auth dot, and you have to append it with OAuth2 /token, and then this request will go to the domain name, which is our Cognito running, and the client ID and client secret are the app client and the client secret which we created. So if I take you back to Cognito, if you see here, this is the domain name which we created, and in the app clients, this is the client ID and the client secret. Also, I will show under app client settings, these are the scopes. So we have to pass the scope names as is. When we send a request in the scope, I'm sending test/read because this token I need only to get the get operation. So I will say get new access token, use this token, and if I send the request now, I get the proper message with status code 200. Similarly, we can test our post operation also. Here for the authorization, instead of read, I will request for write token, though it's not going to write anything. And there is no response actually because it is just mocking it, and status code is 200, so actually we got a proper response. Now here I would like to show you what we receive in the token. So I will just send the request again, and we'll copy this token, copy, then you go to site awt.io, paste your token there, and you see it shows three sections: the header, the payload, and the signature. Now in the payload we have all the information. If you see here, this is a scope which says only test/write scope is allowed, and this is the issuer, and exp is expiry of this token. If you move mouse over it, it says when it is going to expire, and it also has a client ID here. So this all information is here in this JWT token. Instead of this, if I say empty, then we'll get all the scopes which are part of the resource server and allowed on the app client. So if you see here, we get all the scopes allowed. As you can see, it's very easy to configure your APIs and secure them using Cognito, and you can use Client Credentials Flow for service to service communication, which is quite straightforward. If you use user authentication, then you normally use authorization grant code, where authorization code is received first and it is exchanged for an access token. But for service to service communication, we don't need that because mostly it will be on the backend channel. So service will already know the client ID and client secret, and it can directly exchange it for access token. I hope this helps, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.